Human found an alien girl sitting beside his dim lantern. Her quiet reason for waiting changed him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Ethan Walker wasn't the kind of man who believed in the extraordinary. He lived a quiet life in a small town nestled between towering hills, where the wind was always crisp and the nights were colder than the days. He worked as a mechanic at the local garage, a job he enjoyed for its simplicity and predictability. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ethan would wander into the nearby forest, walking the same worn paths, his boots crunching the dry leaves beneath him. The days were uneventful, just the way he liked them. But one evening, something was different. As he passed his usual spot by the old oak tree, something unusual caught his eye. A faint glow flickered from the edge of the path, something unlike the dull yellow of the nearby street lamps. Curious, Ethan moved closer. And there, in the shadow of the ancient tree, sat a girl. She was unlike anyone Ethan had ever seen. Her skin had a soft, iridescent glow, almost as if the moon itself was kissing her. Her hair shimmered in silvery waves, and her eyes were a deep, vibrant shade of blue, the kind that seemed to shift with every glance. What struck Ethan most was her stillness. She sat beside a dim lantern, her posture calm, as though waiting for something or someone. It was as if time itself had paused in her presence. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, a chill creeping down his spine. He wasn't sure why, but he felt compelled to approach her. It wasn't fear he felt, but curiosity, something deep and instinctual that urged him to learn more about this mysterious girl. "Are you lost?" he asked softly, unsure if she could hear him. The girl looked up at him slowly, her gaze intense but not unfriendly. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, her voice broke the silence, quiet and melodic. "I am waiting," she said simply. Ethan blinked, confused. "Waiting for what?" he asked. She paused, her eyes reflecting a sadness he couldn't quite place. "For someone," she replied, her voice trailing off. Ethan frowned. "Who are you waiting for?" The girl didn't answer at first. Instead, she just stared at the lantern, her expression distant, as though lost in thought. Ethan's heart raced, and he couldn't help but feel that there was something more to this encounter than mere coincidence. The air around them seemed to thrum with an unseen energy, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt as though he was standing on the edge of something profound. But whatever it was, he couldn't yet understand. "I don't know who I'm waiting for," the girl whispered finally. "But I know they are coming. I just have to wait." Her words hung in the air, and Ethan could feel a strange sense of calm wash over him, despite the confusion. It was as if, in her presence, all the noise in his world had quieted down. He didn't know why, but in that moment, he felt more alive than he had in years. "Do you mind if I sit with you?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl nodded, a small, understanding smile tugging at her lips. As he sat beside her, the faint glow of the lantern cast long shadows around them, and Ethan could feel the weight of the silence between them. There was something soothing about it, something that made him feel as if he didn't have to rush. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to fill the space with words. They sat there, side by side, in the quiet glow of the lantern, and for reasons Ethan couldn't yet explain, he knew that this moment would change everything. In the silence of the night, Ethan sat beside the strange girl, feeling a weight he couldn't quite place. The dim lantern flickered softly between them, casting shadows that seemed to dance in the cool air. The world around them felt still, as though it had paused in time, waiting for something to happen. Ethan glanced at the girl again. Her gaze was fixed on the lantern, her expression distant. He wondered what she was thinking, what brought her here to this quiet corner of the world, sitting alone in the dark. "You're not from here, are you?" Ethan asked quietly, his voice cutting through the silence like a whisper. The girl turned her head toward him, her deep blue eyes meeting his. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the two of them in this small, sacred space. She shook her head slowly. "No," she said softly, her voice like a melody that was both calming and haunting. I'm far from here. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his curiosity growing. Far, he repeated. How far? The girl smiled faintly, her lips curling just slightly at the corners. Beyond what you know, she said, her words carrying an air of mystery that both intrigued and unsettled him. He couldn't quite understand why, but something about the way she spoke made him feel as though she was carrying the weight of the entire universe in her words. There was a sadness in her eyes, a quiet longing, and Ethan couldn't help but wonder what it was she was waiting for. I've never met anyone like you, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, she seemed to study him, as if trying to decide whether to share something deep, something personal. Finally, she spoke. I'm not like anyone you've ever met, she said softly, her gaze never leaving his. I come from a place where time is not as you know it, where people don't age the way you do, where we wait, not for years, but for lifetimes, for something we can't even explain. Ethan swallowed, unsure how to respond. Her words were so strange, so foreign, and yet they didn't feel like lies. He felt as though she was speaking the truth, though it was beyond his understanding. The wind rustled the leaves around them, the soft murmur of nature filling the silence. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his mind racing. So, you're waiting for someone? He asked, trying to make sense of it all. The girl nodded, her eyes clouded with something deep and unspoken. Yes, she replied quietly, but not in the way you might think. I'm not waiting for someone to come to me. I'm waiting for something within me to change, something that will allow me to move on from this place, to fulfill my purpose. Ethan frowned, trying to grasp her meaning. What's your purpose? He asked, his voice filled with both confusion and fascination. The girl's eyes softened, and she turned her gaze back to the lantern. I don't know yet, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But I feel it coming. And when it does, everything will change. For me, and for you. Ethan sat there in silence, absorbing her words. It felt like the ground beneath him was shifting, like the world he knew was suddenly no longer so certain. He couldn't explain it, but he knew, deep in his bones, that this meeting was not a coincidence. It had to mean something. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something stirring inside him. A question, a hope, a spark of change. In the stillness of the night, Ethan could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air between them. The lantern flickered softly, casting shadows on their faces as they sat there together in the quiet of the forest. The girl, Lyra, had spoken of waiting, waiting for something within herself to change. But what was it? And why did it feel like it was somehow tied to him, to this moment? Ethan shifted uncomfortably, the silence between them growing heavier with every passing second. He glanced over at Lyra, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the lantern. Her eyes were distant again, as though she was lost in thought, waiting for something beyond what Ethan could understand. His mind raced, but the questions only seemed to multiply. What do you mean, you're waiting for something to change? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What is it that's going to change? Lyra turned her gaze to him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. I can't explain it fully, she said quietly, her voice almost a murmur. It's something that can't be put into words. It's not just about waiting for a person. It's about waiting for a moment where everything will become clear. And when it happens, it will change everything. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about the way she said it that made it feel real, something deep and profound, as though she had already lived through it all and was simply waiting for the right moment to unfold. But he still didn't understand. But why are you telling me this? Ethan asked, his voice trembling slightly. Why me? Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the lantern. After a long moment, she spoke again, her voice barely audible. Because you're part of it, she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. Ethan frowned, trying to process her words. Part of what? He asked, his confusion growing. Lyra turned her eyes back to him, and there was something in her gaze now, something almost knowing. Part of the change, she said simply. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to say. Her words felt like a puzzle, and he was struggling to find the missing pieces. I don't understand, he admitted, his voice thick with uncertainty. How could I be a part of this? I'm just me. Lyra smiled, the faintest of smiles, her expression softening. "You're not just anyone, Ethan Walker," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You are part of something bigger, something you can't yet see. But it's there, and it always has been. You just need to be willing to look." Ethan felt a strange sensation stir within him, something like a spark, flickering deep inside. It was as though, for the first time in his life, he was being asked to see something beyond the surface of things, something more than the quiet life he had always known. But how? What was it that he was supposed to see? He didn't know. All he knew was that this moment, this encounter with Lyra, felt like the beginning of something important. The wind whispered through the trees, and Ethan found himself feeling a sudden sense of urgency, as though he had to make a choice, whether to walk away from this strange meeting or to step into something unknown. "What happens when the change comes?" he asked, his voice low with both fear and anticipation. Lyra's gaze softened, and for the briefest of moments, her expression seemed almost sad. "When the change comes," she said, her voice full of quiet resolve, "you'll understand. And then, everything will be different." Ethan sat there in silence, absorbing her words. The weight of what she was saying pressed on him, but he didn't feel burdened. Instead, he felt a sense of possibility, like he was standing at the edge of something new, something that would change everything. In the days that followed, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. It wasn't something obvious, not like a sudden epiphany, but more like a subtle stirring, a sense that his life was beginning to move in a new direction. The days felt longer, filled with an unsettling mix of anticipation and confusion. The memory of Lyra, sitting by the lantern, her quiet words echoing in his mind, refused to leave him. He found himself drawn back to that spot every evening, walking the same path through the forest, but she was never there. The lantern had long since extinguished, and the place felt empty without her. Ethan wasn't sure what he was expecting, but part of him couldn't let go of the feeling that he was waiting for something too. He wasn't sure if he was waiting for her to return, or for some sign that he was on the right path. But each night he returned to the same spot, hoping for something, anything, that would bring him closer to understanding what had happened between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ethan felt a sudden pull in his chest. It was as if something unseen was guiding him, urging him to take one more step down the path he had walked countless times before. This time, as he walked deeper into the forest, he felt it. The same quiet energy that had been present when he first met Lyra. It wasn't a sound, but a presence, a feeling that wrapped around him, filling him with a strange calmness. He stopped in his tracks. There, ahead of him, was a faint glow. At first, it was barely noticeable, but as he drew closer, it grew stronger. The same soft light that had come from the lantern was now shining from a small clearing just ahead. Ethan's heart raced, and a part of him was hesitant, unsure if he should approach. But another part of him, the part that had been awakened by his encounter with Lyra, urged him forward. Slowly, he stepped into the clearing. The lantern was there, just as he remembered, but it was now glowing brighter, casting a warm, inviting light across the space. And there, sitting beside it, was Lyra. She looked up as he approached, her expression serene, as though she had been waiting for him all along. "You came," she said softly, her voice carrying a sense of quiet relief. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "I didn't know if you would be here," he said, his voice unsteady. Lyra smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I knew you would come," she said. "You're part of this. You always have been." Ethan felt a surge of emotion rise within him, but he couldn't quite put it into words. The feeling was so overwhelming that it almost felt like it was more than he could handle. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's eyes softened, and she gestured to the lantern beside them. "This light," she said, "it's a symbol. It represents the change that's coming. The change within you." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "The change," he repeated. "What kind of change?" "The kind of change that will help you see the world as it truly is," Lyra replied. "It's not just about seeing what's in front of you, but understanding what lies beneath. It's about seeing the connections, the things that have always been there, but you couldn't see before." Ethan stood there in silence, trying to process her words. He didn't understand everything she was saying, but something about her words felt true, as if they were speaking to a part of him that had been dormant for far too long. "How do I begin?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra's smile grew wider, and she stood up slowly, her eyes meeting his with a sense of quiet strength. "You've already begun," she said. "The journey isn't about knowing where it will take you. It's about trusting that it will lead you where you need to go. And you'll find that you're never truly alone, not if you're willing to see." Ethan felt a sense of calm settle over him, a peace he hadn't known before. It wasn't an answer, but it was something more, something that felt like the beginning of an answer. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan realized that he didn't need to know everything right now. He just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. In the days that followed, Ethan felt a quiet shift within himself. The nights grew longer, and each evening, he returned to the clearing where he had met Lyra, though she was no longer there. The lantern still stood in its place, but its light seemed different now, brighter, yet more distant, as if it was no longer just a source of light, but a reminder. A reminder of the change that was coming, of the path that had been set before him. He didn't know why, but he felt drawn to this place, to this quiet corner of the world, as though there was something waiting for him, something beyond the physical world that he could not yet see. Ethan had never been a man to put stock in fate or destiny, but something about what Lyra had said kept haunting him. She had spoken of a change, a transformation that was waiting to unfold, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had felt it too. This sense of something about to happen, something that would turn his world upside down. It was a feeling that had been growing inside him, ever since that night when he had sat by the lantern with her, listening to her words. He found himself thinking about her constantly. The way she spoke about seeing the world as it truly was, about the connections that existed beneath the surface of everything. It sounded so simple, yet it felt so profound. Ethan had always lived his life in a practical, straightforward way. But now, as the days stretched on, he began to question the very foundation of his reality. Was there more to life than the daily grind, the routine, the things he thought he knew? What if there was more, something just out of reach, something that could change everything if he was willing to see it? It was one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, that Ethan felt the pull again. This time, it was stronger, more insistent. Without thinking, he found himself walking down the familiar path toward the clearing, the one he had visited so many times before. As he approached, he could feel the energy in the air shift, as though the world itself was holding its breath. When he stepped into the clearing, the lantern was there, glowing as it always had. But now, it felt different, more alive, somehow, as if it were pulsing with a quiet energy that mirrored the beating of his own heart. And there, standing beside it, was Lyra. She was looking up at the stars, her gaze distant, as though she was waiting for something, or someone. As Ethan drew closer, she turned toward him, her eyes meeting his. "You're here," she said softly, as though she had been expecting him all along. Ethan nodded, unsure of what to say. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice hesitant. "About the change, about seeing things differently. I don't know if I fully understand it, but I feel something. Something is shifting." Lyra smiled, a soft, knowing smile, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw something like pride in her eyes. "You're beginning to see," she said, her voice gentle. "That's the first step. The change has already begun within you. It's subtle, like a seed taking root in the dark, but soon, it will grow. And when it does, you will see the world as it truly is." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "How do you know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's smile deepened, her eyes reflecting the light of the lantern. "Because I've been where you are," she said softly. "I've walked this path before, and I know that when the time is right, everything will make sense. But for now, all you need to do is trust." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet understanding that settled deep within his chest. It wasn't an answer, not in the way he had hoped, but it was enough. It was enough to know that he wasn't alone in this journey, that there was a path before him, one that he didn't need to understand right away. All he had to do was trust. And so, in that moment, Ethan made a choice to trust the path that was unfolding before him, to trust the change that was slowly taking root inside him. The journey had begun, and he was ready to see where it would lead. In the weeks that followed, Ethan began to feel the slow, steady shift within him. The world around him still looked the same. The small town, the trees, the familiar roads. But something inside him had changed. It wasn't a visible change, not yet. It was more like a feeling, a subtle awareness that he carried with him wherever he went. He found himself noticing things he had never paid attention to before. The way the sunlight filtered through the leaves in the morning, how the air smelled after rain, the way the wind seemed to speak through the trees. He felt more connected to the world, more aware of its pulse, its rhythm. But it wasn't just the natural world that seemed different. Ethan's interactions with others had changed too. He had always been a quiet man, content to keep to himself, but now he felt a deeper empathy for the people around him. He saw their struggles, their quiet battles, in a way he never had before. He found himself listening more, really hearing what people were saying, not just the words, but the emotions behind them. It was as though the world had become more vivid, more real. One afternoon, as Ethan worked in his garage, fixing the engine of a car that had come in for repairs, he couldn't help but think of Lyra. He hadn't seen her in days, but the memory of her words, her calm presence, lingered in his mind. He wondered where she was, if she was still waiting. He wondered what had happened to her, if she had moved on, or if she was still sitting by the lantern, waiting for the moment of change that she had spoken about. The thought lingered with him as he finished his work, and as the sun began to set, he found himself walking toward the forest again. The air had a familiar chill to it, and the sky was streaked with the warm colors of the setting sun. Ethan wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he felt compelled to return to the clearing. He needed to understand more. As he walked, the feeling inside him grew stronger. The same quiet energy he had felt before seemed to call to him, guiding him forward. When he reached the clearing, he found it just as it had been before, the lantern casting a soft, steady glow in the growing darkness. And there, sitting beside it, was Lyra. She was still waiting, just as she had said she would. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan took a deep breath, his heart beating a little faster as he approached her. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. "About the change, about seeing the world differently. I think I'm starting to understand." Lyra smiled, a small, knowing smile, and gestured for him to sit beside her. "You are beginning to see, Ethan," she said softly. "The change is already happening inside you. You're starting to see what was always there." Ethan sat down next to her, the warmth of the lantern casting gentle light across their faces. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet of the forest surrounded them, and Ethan felt as though he was no longer just sitting in a forest, but standing on the edge of something larger. "I still don't fully understand it," Ethan admitted, his voice thoughtful. "But it feels right. It feels like I'm seeing things more clearly now, as though I'm seeing the connections between everything. Between people, between moments, between all the little things that make up the world." Lyra nodded, her expression soft and content. "That is the first step, Ethan. To see the connections, to feel the threads that bind everything together. And once you see them, once you understand that everything is interconnected, everything changes." Ethan sat there in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't a sudden transformation. It wasn't something that happened all at once. But it was something he could feel, something deep inside, slowly unfolding, like a flower blooming in the quiet of the night. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt at peace with the uncertainty, with the not knowing. He didn't have all the answers, but he was learning to trust the process, to trust the path that was unfolding before him. Lyra stood up slowly, her eyes meeting his with a quiet strength. "The journey is not about having all the answers," she said. "It's about being open to the change, to the transformation. And that, Ethan, is the true beginning." Ethan watched as she slowly walked away, the soft glow of the lantern fading into the distance. And for the first time, he felt ready to take the next step, whatever that step might be. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself living in a kind of peaceful anticipation. The change that Lyra had spoken about had not arrived all at once, but there were small moments, subtle shifts in his perception that he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the way he looked at the world now, but the way the world seemed to look back at him. The way the wind felt against his skin, the rustling of the trees, the sounds of birds singing at dawn. All of it seemed more alive, more connected. Ethan's life in the small town had always been quiet, predictable, but now there was a sense of wonder to everything, a sense that something greater was at play. He didn't know exactly what that something was, but it didn't matter. He felt as though he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he needed to do. The days passed with a new sense of purpose, a quiet knowing that his path was unfolding before him, one small step at a time. He found himself spending more time in nature, walking through the forest, sitting by the lake, simply observing the world around him. It was as if every moment was an invitation to pay attention, to see things more clearly. The connections that Lyra had spoken of, the way everything was interconnected, began to make sense. One afternoon, as Ethan wandered through the woods, he came across a small grove he had never noticed before. The trees here were older, their trunks wide and gnarled, the air thick with the scent of earth and moss. There was a stillness in the air, a kind of sacred quiet, and as Ethan stepped into the grove, he felt it, a deep, resonant peace. It was as if the grove had been waiting for him, just as Lyra had said. He stood there for a long time, breathing in the quiet, allowing himself to simply be in the moment. The world around him seemed to pause, and for the first time, Ethan felt truly at peace. He realized that this was what Lyra had meant. It wasn't about understanding everything all at once or finding all the answers. It was about being present, about trusting the path that was unfolding, even when it didn't make sense. As the sun began to set, casting the forest in golden light, Ethan sat down on a large rock in the center of the grove, his thoughts drifting in the quiet. He felt a connection to this place, to the earth beneath him, to the trees surrounding him. It was a connection he couldn't explain, but it was real, undeniable. And in that moment, Ethan knew that this was the change Lyra had spoken of, the awareness, the presence, the ability to see the world in a way he never had before. He didn't need to know what would happen next, because he trusted that he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the last light of the day faded, Ethan stood up, taking one last look at the grove. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in his life, he was no longer afraid of the unknown. He knew that whatever came next, he would face it with an open heart, ready to embrace the change that was still unfolding within him. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's life continued to shift in ways he could not explain. He had grown used to the subtle changes, the quiet moments of understanding that now filled his days. But there was one thing he had not yet dared to question, the absence of Lyra. Every time he returned to the grove, sat by the lake, or walked through the forest, he half expected her to be there, waiting for him as she had before. Yet, each time, the forest was silent, empty. The lantern no longer glowed in the clearing, and the quiet energy he had once felt around him seemed to have dissipated. For the first time since their encounter, Ethan began to wonder if he had imagined it all, if perhaps Lyra had been a figment of his mind, a symbol of his own internal transformation. But even as those thoughts crept into his mind, he felt the change within him, the transformation that had begun the moment he met her. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in soft hues of orange and purple, Ethan found himself walking again, this time not with a destination in mind, but with a quiet resolve. He wasn't searching for Lyra anymore, not in the same way. Instead, he was searching for something deeper, an understanding, perhaps, of why he had been so drawn to this journey, to this path of change. As he walked through the forest, his footsteps light on the soft earth, he realized that the world around him had not changed in the way he had once thought. The trees still stood tall, their branches reaching toward the sky. The wind still whispered through the leaves, and the stars still hung in the night sky. No, the world had not changed. It was he who had changed. He had learned to see the connections between things, the way everything was intertwined, from the smallest leaf to the largest tree, from the briefest moment to the longest stretch of time. It was all part of something greater, something he could not fully comprehend, but something he could now feel deep inside him. Ethan stopped at the edge of the clearing, where the lantern had once stood. The spot was quiet now, the only sound the rustle of the wind in the trees. He stood there for a moment, allowing the peaceful stillness to wash over him. And then, as though summoned by his thoughts, he heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the whisper of footsteps in the distance. His heart skipped a beat, and he turned, scanning the clearing. At first, he saw nothing. But then, emerging from the shadows of the trees, he saw her. Lyra. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, her figure bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was as though time had stood still, and the world had become a quiet, sacred place, just for the two of them. Lyra smiled, a soft, knowing smile, and then she stepped forward. "I knew you would come," she said, her voice gentle, as if it had always been there, waiting for him. Ethan didn't know what to say. The words felt inadequate, and yet, he couldn't find the need to speak. For the first time in his life, he simply felt the weight of the moment, the presence of the world around him, and the understanding that had slowly unfolded within him. "I thought I had lost you," Ethan finally said, his voice thick with emotion. Lyra shook her head, her expression soft. "You never lost me," she said, her voice full of quiet reassurance. "I was never far away. I've always been with you." The words settled into Ethan's heart, and he felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling of peace that he had been searching for all along. He had not needed to find her, he realized. She had always been there, guiding him, leading him to this moment, to this understanding. "Are you ready?" Lyra asked, her eyes searching his. Ethan nodded slowly, his heart calm, his mind clear. "Yes," he whispered. "I'm ready." And in that moment, with the wind whispering around them and the world standing still, Ethan understood. The change had always been within him, waiting to be seen. And now, as the sun set behind them, he knew that this was only the beginning. In the quiet of the evening, Ethan stood beside Lyra, the setting sun casting long shadows across the clearing. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath, as if waiting for something more to unfold. The air was crisp, cool with the promise of the coming night, and for the first time, Ethan felt truly at peace. His heart, once filled with doubt and uncertainty, now beat in a steady rhythm with the world around him. He had come a long way since that first night by the lantern. What had started as a fleeting encounter had become a turning point in his life, and now, standing here with Lyra, he understood. It was not about seeking answers or trying to make sense of everything. It was about trusting the process, trusting the change that had already begun inside him. Lyra had never left him, not truly. She had always been with him, guiding him, showing him a path he hadn't known existed. It wasn't about finding something outside of himself. It was about realizing what was already there, hidden beneath the surface. The connection he had felt to the world, to the people around him, to the very earth beneath his feet, was real. It had always been there, waiting to be seen. "Do you understand now?" Lyra's voice was soft, like a whisper in the wind, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of wisdom. Ethan looked at her, his eyes searching hers, and nodded slowly. "I think I do," he said, his voice steady. "I've been looking for something outside of myself, something to make sense of the world. But it's not out there, is it? It's here." He placed his hand over his chest, "inside of me. It always was." Lyra smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "Yes, Ethan. It's always been there. The world, the connections, the change you were waiting for. It was never something you had to find. It was something you had to realize." Ethan looked out into the distance, where the last light of the day was fading into the horizon. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the change he had experienced, but for the journey itself. The unknowns, the uncertainties, they had all led him here, to this moment, to this understanding. "So what now?" he asked, his voice quiet but full of hope. "Now," Lyra said, her gaze shifting toward the darkening sky, "now you live. You take what you've learned and you move forward, one step at a time. Trust the path, trust yourself, and trust that the change is already within you. You will always be part of the world, part of the connections that bind everything together." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle deep inside him, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to truly trust in the journey, in the process, in himself. The stars were beginning to appear in the sky, one by one, as the last traces of the sunset disappeared into the night. Ethan turned to Lyra, his heart full of a peace he had never known. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Lyra didn't reply with words. Instead, she gave him a look of quiet understanding, as if she had always known this moment would come. And then, as the night settled around them, she began to fade, slowly disappearing into the shadows of the forest. Ethan stood there for a long time, watching her go, feeling no sense of loss, only gratitude. He knew that the change was not over, that his journey was just beginning. But for the first time, he was no longer afraid of what the future held. He was ready to embrace it, to walk forward with an open heart and a quiet trust in the path that lay ahead.